Over the last few years, I've played nearly every Souls-like I could get my hands on. From the brilliance of games like Lies of P, Another Crab's Treasure, and Tales of Iron, to the mediocre experience of games like Thymesia, Code Vein, and Steel Rising, all the way to the depraved bullshit games like Lords of the Fallen and The Lords of the Fallen. And that's not even to mention all the Metroidvania Souls-likes I've played.
Oh, God, Jesus.
So it's no wonder that I would eventually start wondering what is out there on the PlayStation 2 that would give me a similar experience, seeing as how I almost exclusively play either Souls games or PS2 games. However, the term Souls-like is a bit contentious. From the fetid swamps of Facebook to the reeking threads of Reddit, you can be sure that right this second, someone, somewhere is fighting for their life defining what is and is not a Souls-like. So let's make it worse. I tried over 25 different PS2 games trying to find stuff that, if released today, would more than likely be referred to as a Souls-like by the greater majority of players and journalists. Games that offer some combination of methodical and engaging combat, rewarding exploration, immersive linear, non-linear level design, challenge that offers players a sense of accomplishment, and of course, that dark fantasy and often terrifying aesthetic found throughout the cursed lands of Lordran, Drangleic, and 1,000 poison swamps. Now, every game on this list may not feature every one of those ingredients simultaneously, but they will have some combination of these factors in a way that should feel obvious to those who have spent a bit too much time sitting around the proverbial bonfire. Starting things off, we have Knights of the Temple Infernal Crusade. This PAL exclusive, developed by Chronicles of Riddick developer Starbreeze Studios, has way more Dark Souls energy than I had anticipated, seeing as how the game itself is, well, not very good. At its most basic, this is more or less a third-person action-adventure hack-and-slash game set in medieval Europe, and you play as a Templar knight as he embarks on his first crusade. And while that sounds a bit strange and a bit like this could be a weird Jesus game,
that's because Jesus Christ is my no!
This crusade sees us hacking and slashing through dancing enemies in villages and castles on our way to the gates of hell. The movesets and combos are fun and change depending on the weapon. The executions are brutal with 2 zeros. The music is ripped straight out of your favorite D&D campaigns.
What division we're all?
What? Wow, really?
Dude, go.
Okay.
And although you don't have to be too deliberate in your combat, as it's piss-ass easy and enemies barely do any damage, this all makes for a solid and pleasing gameplay loop that makes me feel more or less at home as a Dark Souls fan. Due to the game being region-locked and made by a studio that wasn't exactly AAA, the game never got quite its flowers. However, it did get some pretty good reviews, with GameSpot saying, "The combat in Knights of the Temple actually makes sense. There's a feeling of control with clear-cut combos and special attacks. Executing these is not easy though, and good timing, quickness, and parrying are necessary to survive under combat that pull off some powerful moves. You cannot just thoughtlessly button mash and hope to accomplish anything. The combat mechanics are pretty darn good, rather complex, and quite challenging to master. And if that doesn't sound like a fucking Dark Souls game, I don't know what does." Now, when we're talking about Proto-Souls games, obviously we have to mention the first-person From Software games, and while I was torn as to whether to throw Shadow Tower or Kingsfield on this list, after some consideration, I really think Shadow Tower Abyss is much more of what I, as a Dark Souls fan, am looking for out of these options. Shadow Tower Abyss is the sequel to Shadow Tower on the PlayStation 1, and if you're looking for horrifying, otherworldly, and oppressive immersion, brutal challenge, puzzle solving, tons of gameplay and progression options, and you've got a bit more patience and time than the average bear, I definitely recommend checking this game out. I mention patience because god damn, this game is obtuse and awkward to play at times. The levels, while being decorated in terrifying atmosphere and verticality, can definitely feel more than a little antagonistic at times, and you're definitely going to be getting turned around in here. Much like the Souls games that carry these games in their memory, the combat is tense and intense intentional. We spend time collecting souls to be used for upgrading and leveling, find hundreds of weapons, literally 500 weapons.
400 babies!
And kill all manner of uniquely horrifying enemies. And if all that wasn't Dark Souls enough for you, you get killed by a falling pillar of cement that you cannot see within the first few steps you take in the game, almost guaranteeing an immediate death to first-time players. Taking place in the first citadel found in the original game, the goal here is to kind of Indiana Jones your way through decaying environments in order to retrieve an arcane spear we believe to be able to bring forth an age of prosperity and fix the dilapidation of the world.
That magic spear
belongs to
the Spear King. The Spear King.
Dead, and so are all of his grandchildren. Then it belongs in a museum. Dr. Jones, sit down!
Something many of the other games on this list lack is a true sense of horror and dread, both in its aesthetics and tone, and boy howdy do we get that in spades with Shadow Tower Abyss. The game was released in Japan only, but a fan translation is available through emulation, which has kept the game alive, so check this one out if you're feeling patient. I sadly wasn't able to get footage of anything beyond the first area, but I will be doing a video on this game later for my series of playing through every PS2 horror game, and in the meantime will undergo the PhD necessary to understand this game. Okay, so believe it or not, as someone who has played through hundreds of hours of every Souls game and has platinumed almost all of them, Sekiro has remained my favorite. It's also the game with probably the most amount of PS2 games that are similar, the most obvious being Tenchu, which Sekiro was originally going to be a follow-up to. However, while Tenchu, Genji, Onimusha, all these games could have been on this list, none of them wowed me the way that Blood Will Tell did, so that's the one we're going to cover in this video. Developed by Gungrave developers Red Entertainment and published by Sega, Blood Will Tell is an action-adventure game based on the legendary 60s manga series Doro.
You're such a fucking pleb. Are you even Japanese, bro?
Look, I'm not gonna pronounce this the way that it's supposed to be pronounced.
How do you do, fellow
Japanese people?
It feels weird to me. I am as white as a fluorescent white bulb. We are going to be calling it Dororo, which actually sounds more racist. And it follows the adventures of a ronin named Hyakimaru in Japan's Sengoku period, who after losing his limbs to monsters has his arms and legs replaced with prosthetic weapons. Sound familiar? You also play alongside and occasionally control the series' titular character,
Dororo,
a teenage thief who is by far one of the most capable and lovable companions this generation has ever seen. They travel together fighting demons, bosses, mini-bosses, meeting NPCs, solving mysteries, and collecting Hakimaru's lost body parts. The first bit of the game is in black and white, which is a nice reference to the manga, but the game will eventually turn to color as Hyakimaru finds more of his body parts and, in the case of color, his eyes. The combat is diverse and engaging. You can shoot fucking rockets from your legs and machine guns from your arms. You can switch from the short-range dagger-type arm swords to a traditional katana, which reminds me a lot of Bloodborne's trick weapons. It's difficult as hell, and you know I have to say this at least once in a video about Souls games. It is tough, but fair. The enemy designs are unique and memorable, obviously largely due to the classic source material. The cutscenes are gorgeous in their cinematography, the writing and the acting is amazing. This game is just spellbinding through and through, and I highly recommend it. Okay, before we talk about Maximo, let's take a quick look at this review someone left on the game in a NeoGAF thread. Maximo loves to waste your time. Not Dark Souls waste your time, but NES fuck you in the teeth waste your time.
You don't want it.
I think I kind of want it.
Maximo Ghost to Glory is actually the game that inspired this list to begin with. I purchased it from my local game store knowing nothing about it besides it being a successor to Ghosts and Goblins, and I was just expecting a little action platformer, some good times, and I got PS2 Dark Souls. You've got linear non-linearity that manifests not only in highly rewarded exploration, but even a hub world similar to Demon Souls that allows you to choose whatever level you want to go to in whatever order you please. You're fighting skeletons that get back up and have to be killed twice. You've got secret routes and shortcuts that plop you into an area you forgot about passing earlier. If you die, you keep your most valuable items and have to carefully choose what to spend your money on, be it a save point, armor, or upgrades. The music and environments are gorgeous and largely see you traversing graveyards, lava-infested depths, and vertical cliff edges, and it's all driven home by combat that is both fun, simple to understand, and difficult to master. Enemy placement is beautifully crafted and usually balanced. Enemy variety always keeps things fresh, and look, you can even get turned into a baby, which is not a thing in Souls, but it is adorable.
Babality.
You've even got mimic chests that look like mimic chests! How did Miyazaki get away with this? Okay, so evidently the look of the mimic chest actually dates all the way back to 70s Dungeons and Dragons and not from this game. That's my bad. Still very cool. But to top it all off, you've got intuitive and endlessly replayable platforming complete with collectathon elements that are sure to make fans of games like Spyro and Super Mario 64 feel right at home. They also have an added benefit of carrying you over those humps of self-doubt when things get stressful by drip feeding you serotonin with the happy sounds of coins and items being collected. All of this and more is happening within one of the most obviously similar to Dark Souls games I've ever played. Games that tried to mimic the Souls formula don't even get it this right, and this came out first. Miyazaki doesn't seem to have mentioned this game anywhere, so I'm sure they're both just drawing from similar inspiration. But if you like Dark Souls, you want a good challenge, an infinitely bumpable soundtrack, and you want to play a Souls-like that actually has good platforming, I desperately recommend Maximo Ghost to Glory. I would also recommend its sequel, Army of Zin, which is more or less the same game but with some quality of life improvements, more focus on NPCs, and just a bit more polish overall, which in my opinion makes for a much more accessible experience. So we do have just one final game on our list, which I think is the most Soulsian of all of the games here. But before we get to it, I want to quickly shout out a couple honorable mentions that I was originally going to put on this list because while these games didn't quite hit the mark I was looking for, I do feel like they have more than a few elements to offer Souls fans looking for some PS2 goodness. Can I get a fucking montage in here, please? At number 1, we have the most surprising game for me on this list because I had never fucking heard of it, Dracon: The Ancient's Gate, which was developed by 6th generation underdog Surreal Software, best known for the Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring game, and one of my favorite PS2 horror games of all time, The Suffering. And I just have to say, wow, what a game. I am in shock and awe. I never heard about the Dracon franchise, and its PS2 entry, The Ancient Gate, is the most Souls-like PS2 game I have discovered by a country mile. You've got a reliable lock-on toggle that not only functions perfectly in melee, or almost perfectly in melee, but one that's even reliable when shooting a bow at range while rolling and strafing. You run around a gorgeous and giant interconnected map, collecting quests from various NPCs, all of which you can keep track of via your menu. And when I say this game is big, man, I mean this game is big. And it's a largeness you can really feel. Like when I was in one of the first areas of the game, I was like, oh yeah, there's no way this is a 10-hour game. And it's not, coming in at a tasteful 30 or so hours. You also have a companion in the form of a charismatic and endearing dragon named Arok, who you can also ride in the sky. But you don't just have to fly with him. Maybe you just want to walk around town shooting people with fireballs. Or maybe you want to go fly around and explore the map. You can just land wherever and you'll probably find something unique, be it a self-contained cave with great loot, enemy outposts, all of this completely optional. Or maybe you want to use Arok to engage in some dogfights with other dragons, or lock on to enemies from above and rain down hellfire from on high. You can do all of this, and all of it works, feels good, and is genuinely challenging. Oh, did I mention this game came out in 2002? The same year as The Thing and goddamn Resident Evil 0. Sure, you had some incredible open world games coming out around that time, like Spider-Man and Vice City, but do those games have floating enemies with nipple rings? I didn't fucking think so. Sure, almost every NPC in the game is using the same character model, but what are you worried about that for? Okay, so what else about this game is similar to Dark Souls? Well, you've got a helpless, chubby guy looking for his daughter in a dangerous place who is helpless without your brilliant strength. Only in this game, I don't believe we break his spirit by helping him, but that's neither here nor there. You've got an incredibly vertical and complex swamp level filled with rickety wooden platforms and amphibious shitheads hankering for a smacking around every corner. NPCs you meet up with in random places, some of whom pretend to be total badasses, but you know ain't shit. You've even got hidden swinging pieces of wood with spikes in them ready to clobber your ass back into the hunter's dream. But this game isn't just great from the perspective of a Souls-like. This is just flat out one of the best games of the generation, and I cannot believe it's so slept on. This is a $15 game on eBay, while not being very well known, and it's a tremendous game. We don't have many of those left. Most games falling under those categories simultaneously are hundreds of fucking dollars without manuals, so go get yourself a copy of this as soon as possible. But that's it for today, guys. Those are some games I feel like Souls fans can find a lot of enjoyment in on the PlayStation 2. Let me know what I missed and what games you think should be here, because hey, maybe I'll do another one. Like I said, I tried fucking 25 games or so and whittled them down to just 5, and there are so much more than that to talk about. Also, quick last note, I know I haven't been releasing a lot of PS2 horror game videos lately. Long story short, I have recorded gameplay for multiple, and every single one of them is in development purgatory while I wait to hear back from individuals related to the game themselves. Can't really say more than that right now, but it's kind of out of my hands, so trust me, I have been waiting to get more out lately. I'm just kind of stuck in limbo until the research and interviews conclude. Huge shout out to my Patreon supporters, Mr. Nobody and Sakre Blue, as well as YouTube channel member Killer J and Raccoon Peddler. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for watching, and I'll smell you later.